Welcome to all the participants of this webinar. So in payments, there's always been this trade-off between convenience and security. And I'd say in the last 5 to 10 years, the increased consumer pressure for convenience has tilted the scales towards ease of use. And indeed, a number of payment providers have started competing on their ease of use and convenience. So the need of the hour is to find the right balance between technology enablement, where we can predict and prevent fraud from happening, but also at the same time provide a seamless user experience. And to help me explore getting that balance right, I've got with me Paul Hadji, CEO and founder of Harangi, a company that creates cutting-edge cybersecurity solutions. Good evening, Paul.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
And Rachel Freeman, Executive Director of Time Bank, which is building a multi-country digital bank as a network with a unique high-touch approach for customer uptake. Afternoon, Rachel.
Thank you, Lance, and thank you, Camilla.
And Ajay Kumar, who's chair of the Singapore chapter of the Data Security Council of India, the DSCI, and regional head of CrowdStrike. Good afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Ajay.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
So welcome to all of you, and hopefully all of your expertise and experience can be brought to bear on this subject. I might start with you though, Paul. Your company reviews the cyber defenses of many different organizations. What are the common areas of weakness, and how should payment businesses address these?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lance, for the question. So I guess a bit of context just to set kind of where I'm coming from and explain a bit about Harangi. So Harangi is a Singapore headquartered cybersecurity company that focuses on helping companies secure and comply their public cloud infrastructure. So a lot of the companies we work with are regulated. So either those are fintech companies or large institutions that are regulated in some way and are transitioning to the cloud. So that's just kind of like where my thoughts are coming from. But I think the two biggest things that we see and the challenges that companies face if they're migrating to the cloud, as well as companies that are sort of being created in the cloud, is not actually setting a security culture from the beginning, and then not setting that security culture also from the top down. And I think that's actually free for these companies to do. And the biggest issues we see is that the executives aren't thinking about security as part of their business. Obviously, like I think historically, security has kind of been seen as the business blocker in a lot of ways and kind of saying no to things. But over time, that's kind of had to change given the amount that businesses are now relying on technology. And like what we advise a lot of the companies to do in the initial conversation is just creating that culture. And most of the time we're engaging with the executives anyways. So we guide them on helping their employees and leaders kind of be cognizant that there is a threat, as well as that security can be a sales enabler, which I don't think most people think about it that way. More and more in our cases, and I'm sure you face this, Ajay, as well, is that like when you deal with large institutions that have mature procurement programs, security is one of the major checkboxes that needs to be checked as parties getting through their procurement. In any company that's selling in B2B space and now B2C space, much more with sort of regulatory fines that's happening, security is becoming a more important part of like holding data, as well as like selling your product and selling it faster, which ultimately is very important, especially in the B2B space. So that's one thing. The other thing that I would mention is that kind of like this new, obviously everyone's probably talking about this at this point, but this new transition to work from home is pushing a lot of companies that aren't traditionally technology companies to switch to cloud-based solutions. Now it's great for a lot of reasons in terms of cost and efficiency, but also brings on different security challenges, right? So they're facing problems that they haven't seen before from a infrastructure and IT manner that they have to learn. And kind of what we've seen is they're like the major three things we've seen there is like they're not training their teams about the differences in the cloud security environment. I'm not going to say that cloud is more secure. There's different security problems in the cloud that may make a security person's job easier, but can also make it more difficult if you don't understand how it works. Understanding the shared responsibility model. So And this is happening less and less, which is good. But originally, when we were first selling our product, the common answer for us as we were selling our product into people that use AWS, GCP, Azure, was that the cloud service provider takes care of security for us. Not actually true. They work on this thing called the shared responsibility model, which means they're responsible for certain parts of the security, but you as the customer are responsible for others. And that's kind of like where Harangi focuses, is helping them with their responsibility in terms of security in the cloud. Yeah, and I think getting third-party help is really useful and often required by regulators in most of the countries in Southeast Asia. And lastly, like automation, like once you are actually building and running your product in the cloud, the more you can automate certain parts of security as part of your development lifecycle, the better off you will be long-term. Of course, you can't automate everything, and that's something that you'll have to get used to, and I think technology in general. But you know, we often encourage, or we do encourage companies to automate whatever they can, and that's kind of like where our product actually helps them, is securing their development pipeline.
So, Paul, one of the thoughts you brought up there was sort of security by design, or make sure it's in the design. So we've had a lot of projects in Australia where people have rushed out in-app payments without really thinking about making sure that the payment credentials that are being embedded in the app belong to the user, and leads to a lot of card fraud. So, and most of them just haven't, the people who design the app are so keen to get it to market and get it to market quickly that they forget all about the security that needs to sit around it.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, like, I mean, security in any business is really just business risk. But I think, especially when we're doing like online payment transactions, it's a very important part of your business risk, right? So like it should be included in, you know, the design, the thought process in terms of how you're going to secure, especially if you're, you know, going to scale, right? Because then it just gets even worse because you become more of a target, right? Which I'm sure Jay deals with often.
So making sure that the person is who they say they are. Rachel brings me into Time Bank, and you're recruiting a number of your customers in kiosks and in grocery stores. So what are some of the insights into the issues confronting you and your banking organization in onboarding those customers sort of remotely in those locations?
Well, thank you, Lance. And just Time as a digital banking group, our first major deployment is in South Africa. It's called Time Bank. And we're just about to hit 2.5 million customers. We've been in operations since February of 2019. So we're growing quite quickly. 85% of our customers have onboarded in the kiosk rather than on the web. You can onboard on a phone, and we have applications on how to do that. But the majority of our customers like to onboard in our kiosks, in the grocery stores in Pick n Pay and Boxer in South Africa. And we actually think that this is a much more secure way, and it also builds a lot of trust with the consumer. So if I think about what Paul said, we actually would be almost like a poster child for what Paul was describing. Our bank is run completely in the cloud. And we always say that when we talk to people that we eat, live, breathe, sleep security. And one of the reasons this is so important is because as a new brand, you have to really build up trust. And trust is very important for digital banking. A lot of our customers are underserved in South Africa. And so we want to create a very good experience for them. But if they're trusting us with their money, which is a big step in South Africa, then we need to make sure that our security is at the top at all times. So when you onboard in the kiosk, it's a controlled experience. So actually, it's much easier than onboarding on your own phone. And we have many layers of security and eKYC that come in at the same time. In South Africa, there's a national ID. So you put in your national ID, and automatically the kiosk starts checking your national ID card against all of the different home affairs databases. So that's happening in the background. At the same time, as you're answering questions, the kiosk is taking photos of you, and that's, again, doing a second layer of checks. And then we do a biometric check, and we have what's considered to be special questions that only you would know. And we put those up not for you to type in, but as multiple choice. So it says, where are you living? And then there are 5 places, one of which is your address, and then others right around that place. So we are using this to record over and over again how and where, what is the kind of doing the KYC for the customer. So within under kind of 5 minutes, it's about 3.5 minutes in South Africa, we've been able to test who that customer is in many different ways, do a proof of life identity check, and check in across FATCA all of the different levels of security to make sure that we really know who our customer is. But at the same time, by having a kiosk, is something that's very tangible. And when you actually, at the end of the process, you get a personalized debit card. It's a Visa card in that one in Time Bank in South Africa. And that actually builds trust as well between us and the customer, that also enhances security. Because when the customer receives something that's, very tangible, a real artifact, that enables the customer to feel very much that this is a real institution, this is a real bank. And the kiosk, by being something that they can also, again, touch, makes that, again, build that trust level, which enhances the relationship between the bank and the customer.
Is that instant issuance of the card from the kiosk?
Yes, the kiosk, actually, as you're going through, in under 3.5 minutes, by the end, you get an actual live debit card and has your name on it. It has smart shopper points for pick and pay in the back. And it's, it's a real active debit card. And then what we've done is you take that to the cash register, and we've installed a tokenized system. It's an anonymous tokenized system, and you can do cash in, cash out at the cash register. So what we believe is that digital banking should be digital in the back end, but actually there are aspects of it that are kind of very easy to use and very user-friendly, in that you can bank where you do your grocery shopping in South Africa. That enables a very easy process.
And there's no human interaction on the onboard?
So actually, we do have human interaction, but it's not to onboard, but we have ambassadors. And after you get the debit card, if you want, the ambassador will explain how to download the app, how to use the account, all the different features of the account. So we believe that it used to be that people went to branches, but when they got to branches, it was always about filling out forms. So at time, we don't like forms. We're very anti-form. So in what we had, but often in banks, we're not explaining really how to use the account. What are the features? How does it actually work? And that's what our ambassadors do. They don't help the person open the account. They're just used for education afterwards. And again, that builds somewhat of this trust element, because there's a live person who is very kind of explaining and providing that type of customer education to our customers.
That's great. Thanks, Rachel. And just turning to you, AJ, and moving country to India, how is the DSCI approaching this balance of security versus convenience? I mean, what's the view on this among the Indian consumers, merchants, and financial institutions?
Sure. Thank you so much. So as you already mentioned, the DSCI is a not-for-profit industry body on data protection in India, set up by NASSCOM, which is a national association for all software solutions organizations there. The objective is, for DSCI, that it engages with the government, the agencies, regulators, industry sectors, industry associations, and think tanks for policy advocacy, thought leadership, capacity building, and outreach initiatives. So there are so many things actually going on right now. Like DSCI has been running several outreach programs to educate merchants, consumers, and financial institutions. As you know, because of the COVID or before the COVID, in fact, India is moving towards massive digital transformation and ramping up cybersecurity initiatives. But at the same time, the customer convenience is an important aspect for frictionless experience, which is part of a digital first strategy. So there are multiple ways actually where financial institutions, the regulators are engaged, and DSCI is helping. But other than DSCI, if you look at the overall, the scenario, whether India or even outside India, there is one thing which probably, our financial institutions are looking at, is a risk-based authentication, which is a very good, I would say, phenomena. If you look at the RBA, risk-based authentication, which provides a countermeasure, is a magic ingredient to balance, the convenience and security. It's an elusive technology that further protects consumers online, while simplifying the payment experience at the same time. So it's a very dynamic parameter-driven system that measures the risk level of a transaction, uses it to determine how strong the security challenge should be. The parameters include your transaction amount, your number of transactions with a specified time frame, or even the holders, the browser fingerprint, and the country that payment originates in. Issuers can decide their individual risk profile, let the transactions that they deem safe be authorized without any further authentication. At the same time, the customer is only required to enter the 3D secure password for high risk transactions instead of every time they initiate a payment online. So the point is that I think because of so many digital transformation, digital initiatives in India and outside India at this moment, or even after COVID, there are so many cashless transactions happening. The banks, regulators, including the schemes, so Visa, MasterCard, actually are coming up and supporting actually those financial institutions to have a balanced approach in terms of a customer convenience and security.
And what does the average consumer think about the security risk of using digital channels? Do they see it as high risk, or they don't even think about it?
No, they think it's a high risk because, as you know, that India or even Indonesia, you talk about it's a cash rich, the transaction countries. If you look at it, the number of transactions are on cash, not on digital. But I think the way, the central bank regulator, which is NPCI, National Payments Corporation of India, they launched a UPI. They are digital banks, a couple of digital banks like, the Paytm and a couple of other digital banks. And they have reached actually to the tier 2, tier 3 cities or tier 4 cities. There are multiple outreach program, the customer awareness program for schemes from Visa and MasterCard side. So I think, and there is no option in the COVID situation because they have to move on the digital platform to do a transaction because of a lockdown situation. So I think, the reservation to use the digital, I would say, has been drastically reduced. They have started believing because at the same time, organizations are upgrading the security to secure the transactions as well as identities of the customers. So I think the scenario has been changed for last 6 to 8 months.
Right. And when we look at most of the fraudulent payments that occur on cards, they're occurring through criminals, usually organized gangs, gaining access to a list of card credentials in a database, often set up by a merchant, and then using them to buy things online. And then similarly, financial losses are occurring through ID takeover, when the villains are gathering key bits of information from various sources to allow themselves to impersonate somebody, again, scavenging data mainly electronically. So to Paul and AJ, how can this data and information be kept more secure so that these sort of criminal elements don't get access to them?
Yeah, sure. I guess I can jump first. I'll give my thoughts,
Yes,
and then you, Jay. Yeah, I think for me, and what we've done as a business, and I'm sure what a lot of the tech companies are doing these days is using third-party processors. Like, for example, we use Stripe. There's plenty of them out there that are good that help you with a lot of the security issues that you might face because you don't actually ever see the credit card number in those cases as long as you integrate it correctly. So that's what we do, and if you do have the capability to do that, I think that's good. Some cases you may need to process that payment yourself, and you can follow like PCI DSS, which is going to be one of the best practices in that front. But ultimately, I think what's going to actually change this the most is not leaving it to the companies to do correctly, but regulation will help quite a bit. A lot of the regulation in Singapore and Hong Kong is pretty strong in the area, but can always be better. In terms of making sure that people are processing payments securely, doing the right set of checks, having recommended payment providers to help do those types of things that can really help, and then ultimately having fines in place that do punish people that make mistakes, right? PDPA is getting a bit more aggressive, I think, here in Singapore on the fines, but still nothing like what the payment card industry is like in the US. But ultimately, I think that's really what's going to change things dramatically, is like the regulatory stuff that comes. There's plenty of technological solutions out there to solve the problem, but it's really about the regulators enforcing it and making sure that people use it, which will make the biggest change, in my opinion.
And what about tokenization, which is effectively disguising the card details so people can't get them?
Yeah, and that's essentially what like Stripe does, right? Is they handle all the security and stuff themselves, and obviously a very big company that can handle a lot of the security practices. And I mean, from a technology perspective, like you're putting the risk on a third party in that case, and like there's advantages to that as long as you have your contracts and security implementation on your end set up correctly. So yeah, I think in a lot of cases, if you aren't going to process the payments yourselves and don't need to in terms of your business model, it's best to use a third party.
AJ?
Yeah, so I agree with Paul. If you look at it, there are multiple sophisticated ways to be used actually by adversaries to gain the access of card data. So, however, the financial institutions and schemes have introduced mitigations around these frauds to protect the customer from fraudulent transactions. If you look at one example, I remember that the MasterCard acquired a company called New Data Security recently. So to keep bad actors away, New Data looks at the user behavior and those other data points to validate legitimate logins. Then the customer or account actually is analyzed in a real time across the entire session to make sure that there are no sudden changes in the behavior. So ATO, which is account takeover solution, also prevents from automated attacks. So the bad actor uses automated scripts to test the stolen credentials against merchant login interfaces to find the working ones. And then using the online validation aggregators, the bad actors keeps testing the same credentials even hourly to make sure that they are valid, still valid, until someone buys from them for actually account takeover fraud. So I think ATO solution, account takeover solution, which we have been seeing in the market from different organizations, as I mentioned, New Data, that expose the account takeover, monitor the traffic. Another thing which is quite interesting is IP geolocation. So if you have IP geolocation solution, you can actually find out where is the customer location at this moment. So that those kind of a solutions, and other than that, actually device identification is one of the strategy which financial institutions are adopting actually to find out the real or the fraudulent transactions.
And Rachel, at least in this market, a number of the banks have adopted on their mobile app sort of lock, block, and limit the card transactions. Does Time use that sort of system?
So, well, first, we use systems like that, but what we're finding more in South Africa is that people are not using the phone as much for payments. That is going to come, but they're using more of the card, and swiping the card or tapping the card is much more common. So we put more security focus into that type of aspect when you're talking about tokenization, other aspects with the card. But we are looking into that because the POS machines are going online. So the POS machines will be, rather than a terminal, they're going to be installed as soft POS on the phones for small merchants. So then that's going to be quite important to actually have limits and to review that. So what we have, and we work with companies like what Paul has, where first we have 3 companies at all times that are doing testing. South Africa is considered to be a country in which security is quite important. You have Hong Kong, Singapore have standards. South Africa has quite high standards because it has had different elements of criminal behavior for a while. That's quite well known. So we have 3 separate institutions regularly doing testing, as well as our own security team. And then because one thing is that while we have our own team doing security testing, we also rely on third parties to help us this is their business and they're doing testing all the time. So they have much more expertise. And so what we always try to do, whether it's security or any other part of our tech stack, that we try to find best of breed and bring them in to the technology microservice platform that we have, so that we can actually rely on their broader experience than just the customer list that we have. So that is the first layer of what we're doing, is building up and using the other parts. And then in terms of payments integration, I think people will find interesting. In South Africa, in the beginning, the regulator required that our payments integration could not be in the cloud. It was the only aspect of Time Bank's technology that was not in the cloud when we launched Time Bank in South Africa. We're now moving that onto the cloud, but they wanted to watch for a while and see how that went. And when we actually are looking into launching our next bank, which will be in Southeast Asia, again, payments is going to be something that has to be very localized, that we are looking and meeting regularly with potential payments integrators across Southeast Asia so that we could benefit from the security that those institutions to bring in. That payments has to be done, have kind of a global experience as well as very localized experience in order to get these things right.
Right. And you're talking about moving into the Asia Pacific area.
Yes.
Obviously, across Asia Pacific, there are very different levels of adoption of the forms of electronic payments. Your bank is obviously wanting to drive that uptake because you're fully digital. What needs to happen to increase that level of adoption?
So while lots of people who see online payments as becoming stronger, even with COVID, still, and many countries in Southeast Asia are emerging markets countries, which is where we like to work, that over 90% of transactions are still done in cash. So even with a lot of conversations about online payments, there's still a significant element that's happening in physical retail and often with cash. So for us, what's really important when we look at the markets is that in order to build greater digital payments, there needs to be the trust by the customer that you can have your money in cash, quickly move it into digital, and then take it out. And once, if you have that trust that you can move quickly in and out of digital, then people are going to be willing to actually move more onto digital payments. So that's why when we look at these markets, we focus on what is the way and the mechanism we're going to be using to facilitate cash management and cash handling. And that's why we tend to work with retail and through existing retail infrastructure, which is where a lot of the cash is sitting in a lot of these countries with consumers and the types of consumers, the more underserved that we like to serve. So when after we solve onboarding with a kiosk, the next step that we always try to solve is this cash in, cash out element, which we do through a tokenized mechanism, not through agents, in order to enable that, again, level of trust in us that people will be able to access their money the way they want to, whenever they want that, which is the kind of foundation we believe in order to have digital payments.
Oh, thank you. So just like the awareness and use of electronic payments sort of differs across Asia Pacific, so does the incidence of fraud and the adoption of different cybersecurity measures. Paul and AJ, you're involved in lots of different countries. What do you see as the sort of mosaic across Asia Pacific in terms of fraud and cyber?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. Yeah, so we work in Singapore, Thailand, Hong Kong, Philippines, Indonesia. That's kind of our core focus. And I would say, Singapore and Hong Kong, decently mature. I think in both cases, the government does a really good job of advertising about cybersecurity fraud incidents that are happening in the community. There's even in Singapore, like I see the ads all over the place talking about like different types of phishing campaigns and stuff, especially for the elderly population. So I would say like, in those cases, it's pretty good. It's not perfect, and I don't think you can get to a perfect place, but you can always do more. And then I would say like in Indonesia, Thailand, and the other countries around, like less mature. Some of the businesses, like in Indonesia, it's quite common to go for ISO 27001 and PCI DSS requirements, often more common than actually what I've seen in Singapore. So a lot of companies are taking that initiative. But in general, I would say the maturity level is lower, and something that the regulators there are working on. So there's like OJECA as well as other regulators that are spending more time and helping the companies get there. But it's also, I think, a bit more difficult to enforce and message, as there's a lot more people and way less centralized. But yeah, like I think generally, like it's improved in the 7 years that I've been in Southeast Asia, but it's still not a place where it needs to be for the long term in any of the markets. But I don't think that's any different from any other market in the world. Like all countries are struggling with this challenge.
AJ?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I agree with Paul and Rachel. And Rachel mentioned actually about the digital banking, because you don't have a brick and mortar model, so you can have a lot of savings in terms of investment, which could be passed to the customer, but at the same time to to be invested to ramp up the cybersecurity or infrastructure. And I understand that the countries like in Southeast Asia, like Indonesia or Vietnam, there are so many projects going on for a financial inclusion to connect unbanked population with the banking services. And there is a leapfrog, because you're not going to give a card to those customers. They can easily move to the digital technology. So definitely the fraud and other form of the fraudulent transactions are there. But and there is another way is that there are multiple form factors as well, multiple touch points, the digital footprints, which create a complexity in the entire payment landscape. That's where fraudsters actually take the advantage. We have seen banks coming up with innovative ideas that you can block your cards, you can unblock it wherever you want to do a transaction. You can also define different rules to use it for domestic transaction, international transactions, online transactions, through your internet banking, or based on geolocation, which I mentioned. Paul mentioned PCI. Definitely PCI and ISO 27001 are actually mandatory compliance requirements in a couple of countries. So I think I would say the regulators are quite open at this moment, especially if you look at the Singapore regulations here, quite open, MAS, to actually protect the consumer's identity and transactions. But at the same time, there are a lot of phishing campaigns we have been seeing from a CrowdStrike perspective. Consumers are getting phishing emails, links to click on it. It could be COVID. I mean, okay, so you can get some COVID benefit or some kind of some different help from the government side, or some benefit or promotion or offer from the banking side. The moment you click, you're gone. So I think those kind of incidents we have been seeing. So the two kind of fraud, I would say. One is for the consumers, where banks are connecting those and giving services, but at the same time for the internal employees as well. So how to protect those internal employees of a financial institution is also very, very key. And that's the reason actually CrowdStrike is helping to deploy those endpoint protection platform, whether endpoint detection and response, EDR, or even the couple of services like compromise assessment and incident response services and other services for these financial institutions.
Okay. Well, we've actually got a couple of questions from the audience. So we got one from Mark Brown, and probably directed at Paul and AJ. What is the biggest and most costly mistake that the panel believes organizations are making in relation to cybersecurity?
Yeah, I can go first. Yeah, I think it's like I kind of mentioned this in the first part. I think it's the culture setting, because ultimately, there's a lot of technology and stuff that you can invest in, but if the culture isn't set in the business and people aren't vigilant in terms of how they think about their organization and themselves potentially as a threat, then it causes a lot of issues. I'm not going to say this is an easy problem to solve either, especially if the culture is already not set in a security-minded manner. But in reality, I think that's the biggest. It's free. And maybe not from a time perspective, but from a money perspective. And it's something that I don't see built in many organizations. There's plenty of organizations with a great security culture, and people think about themselves as well as the company as potential target. But in reality, I don't see it as many as you should. And that's what I would like to see more of, and where I see some of the biggest risk coming from is people just not thinking about it, right? And it matters in most decisions that an organization will make, not all, but most.
AJ, what's the big mistakes people are making?
Yeah, I agree with Paul here, because human is the weakest link. So I would say that in terms of the cybersecurity strategy, there is a lot of investment happening on the technology side. The new tools and technologies are being deployed. But I would say that there is a need to have a strong proactive approach to educate the employees, to educate the vendors, to educate the customers. So I think the investment in terms of the human education, as I mentioned, most of the cybersecurity breaches have been operated by those human adversaries. So the culture setting is one thing. How organization is thinking, how organization is taking cybersecurity seriously, and because we have been actually seeing those organizations who do not focus on proactive and cyber resiliency strategy. Once they breach, they realize that what they have missed because they have invested a lot in terms of the technology, not on the internal education, the awareness campaigns for their employees. So I think this is the biggest cost I believe they are going to pay.
Another question we got is how real is sort of cyber attacks bringing down a country's government or systems or payments infrastructure? Is it science fiction, or are people actually deploying this to attack countries?
Yeah, again, my opinion on this, I think it's kind of the future, like first escalation of warfare is going to be cyber. So I think it's definitely real. I mean, I think if there's a potential adversary in your whatever country specifically you're talking about, or there's this potential of espionage threat, it is pretty real. And I think there's a couple conflicts where it's happened already. I think there's one in, I can't remember the actual country that happened, but it was back in 2012. It was one of the first ones on record. And then another one more recently in Asia, actually. So I think it's very real. And you'll start to see that, as well as reconnaissance and things like that. That will be a very real part of warfare. And a lot of organizations, U.S. government included, has created specific commands specifically to address this problem, because it is going to be very real. The good thing about it, I guess, is non-kinetic. So in most parts, I guess they can shut down power grids and affect other things, but I think it's real. I mean, the chances of it happening are much lower, I think, than the more traditional cybercrime, but definitely possible, and something that we will see more of it being used in the future.
Any other thoughts from the panel?
Yeah, from my side, I would say it is absolutely real. It's no more, the Bollywood movies, the thing, because if we have been engaging with a lot of initiatives here. We have been seeing a lot of attack by nation states. They are almost, as per our, the data, our report, 49% attacks are coming from malware, 51% malware-free attacks are happening, whether from a terrorist group attacks and hacktivates or cyber criminals, organized criminal gangs, or a nation state, which we have identified. So we track almost 140 plus, adversary groups across the globe, whether nation state or e-crime group. So one of the examples which I can quote is Ukraine. So Ukraine electricity, the entire circuit was down because of the cyber attack from their neighbors. So this is the real. Actually, if you look at it, the attack initiated through a software and then actually disrupted the entire hardware infrastructure. So that was one of the cases, but we have been seeing a lot of cases actually in this part of the world as well, where we are engaged, with those customers. So it is a real now. It is no more, any other, the Bollywood movies or Hollywood movies story.
So thank you for that. Another question came through. Do we think that we'll see regulators push from moving from sort of inside out, point in time compliance to dynamic outside in, such as red teaming? Now, you cyber people probably understand that better than I do. So, Paul and AJ?
No problem. So I can take it. I mean, they are. If you look at the red teaming exercise, is similar to pen testing, and definitely Paul would also touch upon that. So there are 2-3 scenarios here. How mature is the organization? So we have in our CrowdStrike, we have 3 methodologies. There are 3 questions which generally CIOs and CEO asked, to their internal team members or board. Am I breached? Am I mature? Am I ready? So MI breach in the sense they are cybersecurity incident, response services or compromise assessment. MI matured means that how mature is the organization to defend any kind of a cyber attack. So they go for a maturity assessment. MI ready means that you can test yourself from pen testing, from your red team, blue team operations, or red team exercises. So from a red team perspective, definitely, I mean, there are regulators. If you look at Malaysia, RMIT, which is the central bank regulator, RMIT has captured in their document that financial institutions need to have a compromise assessment every year. They also mentioned that organizations need to test their infrastructure, test their, the defensive approach, the cyber defense approach, actually, and they should have red team and blue team exercises. So I think it's key. It's important to test, our capability to defend any kind of attack, and red team is one way to do that.
Yeah, and to add on a bit there, like I think like HKMA, Rachel knows a bit, has actually required ICAS requirements. So they actually, which is kind of red teaming. So they actually are starting to require it now in Hong Kong for the intermediate and advanced sort of digital banking licenses as well.
Okay. Another question's come forward. What level of regulator should be dealing with this? Is it a domestic, a regional, or a global approach from regulation that's required? And therefore, should there be the same sort of domestic, regional, global cyber sort of police force deployed? How do you deal with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be really hard to have like a totally global police force. There can be standards, but the regulators have to actually tend to this and engage directly, and then consult. I mean, there are a number of different regulator bodies that they can rely on for assistance or to share information. But I think that, any type of try to be global police force is actually going to in some way slow down efforts that individual regulators can take forward. And so it's better to do like have some of the regulators are very much out ahead on this, like MAS or HKMA. And so having them kind of share and take the lead through different kind of institutions is actually going to be a better approach.
Other thoughts on that?
So I would say from my side that definitely it's a regional approach, always a country-specific approach to deal with those cyber security attacks or incidents. But there could be a collaboration on the global level. There could be a collaboration on the regional level. There are so many, the MOUs signed in between countries, in between the regions, in between regulators. So one of them is, I can give example that like CSA, Cybersecurity Agency, has a MOU signed with CERT-IN. So they can share a lot of information, what is going on in India in terms of a cybersecurity, incidents. So they can share the information with the CSA Singapore, and the same way CSA can share something, with India. And there are other collaboration as well in between the US and then Asian countries. So I think to deal with the cyber security attack, definitely it's a regional and country-based issue, but there could be some collaboration because adversaries are not in the country, they are outside the country and they're dealing globally. So that the global collaboration is very, very important to identify who is the adversary, what damage it has done, what data it has exfiltrated, and whether data has been actually sold on the dark web or posted on a social media platform. So I think collaboration is something very important.
It makes me think of the airline industry and IATA, because I do quite a bit of travel and airline payments. But IATA organizes globally, tends to be each year, one day of the year where they coordinate police forces in many different countries to stop people boarding planes with fraudulent tickets or tickets that have been purchased with fraudulent credit cards. And that global impact, sort of all hitting on the one day, does have an impact on people's perception of the policing of that activity. Whereas if it all happens ad hoc in one country on one day and different country on different days, or people don't think about it, you don't get the same impact. It just made me wonder whether there's something could be coordinated similarly around cyber.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And in fact, when we launched this chapter, Singapore chapter of DSCI, the anchor of the chapter was Executive Director of Interpol, Dr. Madan Oberoi, and he was the Executive Director of the Outreach Program of Interpol initiative. So yeah, I mean, there is a lot of the coordination and collaborations are happening among the countries. Interpol is one of the bodies where they are actually helping those countries to give a lot of inputs and threat intelligence to protect those incidents as well.
So moving on from that, just as providers have sort of bent over backwards to provide seamless, convenient, easy to use payments to consumer, is it possible for payments to remain secure without at least some security hurdles being inserted in, as you said, AJ, at high-risk transactions? Or is the consumer expecting all of this to happen without any disturbance to them on security checks?
No, I think it works both the ways, because if you have more security, it would create more friction for the consumers. So I believe, as I mentioned, that it needs to be a fine balance in between convenience and security. So definitely a risk-based approach, is the way to go. High-value transactions definitely actually could have some kind of a step-up authentication, but low-value transactions should be a frictionless. I would say it should not be too many steps actually to do a transaction, and that's where customer can be on board and can do frictionless transactions on any platform and at any place, whether at home, in office, or on the go.
And Rachel, how about your customers? Are they expecting sort of seamless payments everywhere, anywhere?
I mean, of course, the customer experience is quite important, but I would say that, the customers that we're working with, which are, in some ways the underserved in South Africa. So, we have a high success rate of customers where a high net promoter score with, for example, low-income women. So those customers are looking for institutions like Time to meet needs, but their needs are going to be based on somewhat the trust that you can save. And so the focus is going to be more on some of the other products, and less that payments is almost like a commodity in some ways for them. But it's not that they're going to be looking at kind of payments that is automatic all the time for any value. We do not see that as a high demand from our customers. Our customers are looking more for the ability to, open accounts, be able to deposit and do transactions, or have interesting savings products that they use, and then start to have interesting kind of responsible lending products that they understand and make sense for them. I think the more that customers really understand what the products are and how they work, and also how kind of payments can make things easier, but also protect them, is going to be higher need than actually as quick as possible, at least for the customers. When we're looking at customers which are underserved or unbanked in the Philippines or in Vietnam or, Indonesia, that number one on them is not going to be to make the fastest international transaction possible. It's going to be other mechanisms to make their lives easier, and then you can build on that.
There was an interesting study, I think, in the UK that showed that older consumers actually quite like two-factor authentication because they felt that the bank was keeping their money safe.
Yeah.
Making sure it was them making the transaction and not some fraudster down the line. So it is possible to use sort of the security hurdles, inserting security hurdles to actually improve to the customer perception to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, when, there's a kind of impression that most customers are digital and ready to use digital banking because they like Facebook, or they're using a lot of TikTok or social media. and they use or listening to music. But what we've seen that there's a big difference between a comfort level about being on social media and a comfort level about banking on your phone. And so the extra checks and balances that are in place to guarantee security are actually welcomed by the majority of our customers. And in South Africa, our customer base reflects exactly the demographic of South Africa. So we're not kind of a bank, a digital bank for just a niche group of digital savvy people. We're looking for the mass market. So our processes and how our bank accounts work have to really meet the needs of the mass market of all demographic groups. And so these aspects of security really hit home for a number of those different people who, have always in some ways previously felt that if you had to pay to bank. So by having transparent fees and having transparent procedures actually builds comfort level.
So just in the final few minutes before I hand back to Camilla, I might just go around to each of you and ask for any final advice to payment providers about cybersecurity, about things that they should be watching out for that are new on the horizon, or even the basics. So Paul, I might start with you.
Okay. Yeah, I think for me and kind of like what we're seeing with a lot of people making this transition to the cloud is that the security challenges are different. Your teams, IT, security, even the employees are going to need different types of training to make sure they're kind of adhering to this environment. In reality, again, there's a ton of advantages of moving to the cloud, and we're a cloud first company. But ultimately, there's also new challenges as well. You need to be prepared for those, and also be ready to invest in those, because your security budget isn't just going to shrink from moving to the cloud. And there's new areas where you'll have to apply it in most cases. There is savings to be had, don't get me wrong, but ultimately, you're still going to have to invest in security in the long term.
Okay, AJ?
Yeah, so I think we are also cloud-based. So we have next-gen, the cybersecurity platform, which is 100% cloud-based. We don't have a on-prem. So I agree with Paul, but at the same time, I would like to, highlight here that the organizations need to have a proactive approach for any cybersecurity, strategy. Cyber resilience is the ability to prepare for, respond to, and recover from cyber attacks. It is very, very important because it helps organizations to protect themselves from cyber risk, defend against and limit the severity of attacks, and ensure that business operations continue to function. This is very, very important. It involves a change of mindset, as Paul earlier mentioned, the culture about how security operates within an organization and beyond. For this reason, many companies look to cybersecurity service providers to deliver skills, the experience and best practices, whether it's a tabletop exercise or maturity assessment that the organization lacks. And the last from my side is, as I mentioned earlier, the human is the weakest link. So while prepare for the budget for tools and technology, organizations should also invest in employees' education at all the levels. The phishing is the best example how easy it is to get the attacks from phishing campaigns. So cybersecurity is about reacting, cyber resilience is anticipating. One thing which I would also like to cover here is that absolute security is absolutely impossible, which is an illusion. If somebody thinks that they are secure, it is not true. So know your adversary, strategic threat intelligence. Your adversaries want only two things: to steal, destroy, modify your data, and to implant a capability to take control of your systems or networks at the time of their choosing. So focus on basics. It's all about speed, detect, respond, and back to normal. This is my last point.
Thanks, AJ. And Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what both Paul and AJ said. I think that first of all, you create the culture in the company that's the founders and the shareholders of any institution. You need to prioritize security and make that part of the trust element that you have with the customer from day one. So security is not a hindrance, but it's enhancing your relationship with your customers. And then secondly, by using the cloud and by using new technologies, it's about not building your own and just making sure building everything yourself, but actually going out there and finding the best partnerships that you can and adding that to your security and your tech platform that you have. So, I think we always think, don't we let even things that we think we're the best at building right now, we may not be the best at building tomorrow. So we're always looking to partnership and to add and to meet new players in this area and other areas of technology, so that we can enhance what we're doing and bring the best to the customer. And that always includes making sure that the customer's money, their privacy, their data, everything is as secure as possible.
Well, Paul, Rachel, AJ, thank you so much for your insightful comments during the panel discussion and answering our participants' questions. And at that point, I'm handing back over to Camilla. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Lance, and thank you, Rachel, AJ, and Paul. And that was fantastic. I do praise myself in putting good panels together that can cover it from different angles. So thank you for proving me right on this one and accepting my invite. So this is, as I said, this is just the beginning of a stream where we're focusing on cybersecurity. So we're running a round table on the 4th of February together with the Israeli and Australian Chamber of Commerce. So they're connecting us into Israel to hear a little bit what's going on there. And we also, I think, will do another interview session because Lance did a smashing one 2 weeks ago. So to all of you attendees, I will follow this up with an email, and we'll attach the interview we've done before, and as well this recording in case you want to go back to it. And I'm sure that the panelists are happy also for you to reach out and follow up on the conversation. So thank you very much. Over and out for today, and we hope to see you soon again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.